Welcome to Latitude Photography Podcast, the place where travel outdoor photographers come to learn, to grow, create, and be inspired. Thank you so much for being here today. And today I am joined by Bree Stockwell. She comes to us from Texas. She is a Latitude regular. It's a group of people that I put a casting call out a while back, and she responded to the call. She was in episode 81. And so, Bree, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brent. Great to be with you again.
And thank you so much for allowing me to also do this as a video. So it's going to be on the YouTube and in the regular audio that reaches all of our phones or whatever device where we listen to the podcast. And so we have our cameras going, and this is just kind of a different experience for us. And we're going to try and make it work this time. This is actually, no one else knows this unless I say it. This is like the fourth time we're trying to get this done.
Take 4.
And it's just like, Brent, you shouldn't admit that. But, I'm okay with admitting my challenges and failures and all these other things. We're going to get it to work. We're going to persevere, and we're going to get it to work.
That's right. We persevered.
All right. Good. So glad to have you here. And we're going to talk about this module that's in my course that's coming out here soon. The overall course is called Design and Creativity in Photography. And specifically, we're looking at a module that I'm calling Formmaking. And what I'd like to also kind of put out there is, I guess we can maybe call this like a beta test, if you will, a beta version of the course. It's not complete because as I was going through it, I was like, I need to talk about this and I need to talk about that still. And I don't want to make it such this big gargantuan module that, is just overwhelming people. But there is a lot of things to talk about when we're talking about composition. And we're talking about, in this case, we'll call it visual form making. And so give us a little bit of a story about, basically you came to my region recently. You're from Texas and you've never been to Washington State. And so give us a little bit of that tidbit of information about that journey and just some of the fun that we had out there shooting.
Yeah, sure. I visited a friend in Spokane, and I knew my husband and I were going to go. I know it's kind of a crazy time to travel, but we just we can't go anywhere internationally, and I did have some trips planned, but all those are gone. And so we just thought we'll fly and stay with just my friends, and we'll do outdoor things, and we'll make that work. And so I messaged you because I know you are in Southeast Washington, and I said, hey, I'm coming. Can we shoot together? And you said, of course. And you said, how about we meet at Palouse Falls? And I said, great idea. So we met up, and actually, I know this is take 4 of this, but on the first time, you're right. Pretty surprised. But because I'm a beginner, I've just been kind of doing this on my own and going places on my own. My husband will go hiking or wherever with me. But that was the first time I had gone actually shooting with another person. So
awesome.
Yeah, so it was really nice to be with. I understand why people do workshops, now, and why we all need to kind of get with people who are like-minded. So we met up at Palouse Falls. We tried to get sunset, and it was clear day, of course.
Yeah.
So super clear day. But it was really great for a variety of reasons. And I loved Palouse Falls. I highly recommend going to that area and even if you're not a photographer, just exploring. So.
Absolutely. Exploring, seeing what's out there, and finding something of interest to you that, you just end up being drawn to. That's the thing that I just love about exploring is I don't know what I'm going to find, but, we're going to find something that's hopefully awesome, and we'll just be drawn to it, and we'll make some great pictures of it. So,
right.
So let's get started here with this whole idea of visual form making and just what is it that we're going to be diving deep into? What are we going to actually be looking at with these items? So we're going to be thinking about contrast, hierarchy, lines, from horizontal, vertical, curvy, diagonal, that sort of thing. Visual weight, the idea of balance in an image, and the border. And of course, we need to think about, this is why I kind of said it's a beta type version of this module, and that is I want to think about framing too, because that is a very important principle when it comes to the idea of creating some type of image, some type of composition. How you frame the image makes all the difference in the world. And here in this shot from Hong Kong, I stood there for so long, and it was just like, I gotta get my shot. I want the view from the peak and just nothing getting in the way. And it was raining, and I was getting all soaked and wet. And then here, people are just standing in my way. And finally, it dawned on me. I'm just like, Brent, get over yourself. This is the image. And so I've got this person. Yeah, he's out of focus, but that's because we're focusing in down there on the city. And because I have that human element, I think it changes the image just enough that, I don't know, what does it do for you, Brie, when you see someone there with the person in the frame?
Well, I love, first of all, that this one, the person is out of focus. So that's not the subject
Right.
of this image, right? But it gives us a little bit of context over
Right.
where you are. I think it feels like I'm in the image.
Yes, and
Just
that was kind of my point, I think, is
yeah,
just
yeah.
have it be inviting, have it be something where the viewer can maybe sort of, rubber stamp themselves into that person, as it were. That's a Photoshop term if you're not familiar with Photoshop, where you clone yourself in. And like you said, it kind of puts you there.
Right.
And
And
yeah.
I've been here before, and there's a lot of people there, so it is very
Oh, yeah.
difficult to get an image there without a person in it. But it took me back to that moment. I was there during the day, but it did take me back to that moment, and so I could reminisce. But it's great,
Awesome.
great place.
So let's take a look. We have this next image is coming to us. These next few images come to us from Croatia, and we're going to focus on this idea of contrast a little bit. And there are various ideas on this whole notion of contrast. We have contrast certainly from brights to darks, right? Where we're looking at the whole scope of the image, whether it's, lots of highlights and lots of shadows. That would be characteristic of a high contrast image. But we have these other ways of thinking of contrast too, and we'll get to some of those in a moment. But we also have some images of yours, Bree, that we'll look at the very end. But let's describe a little bit of that idea at Palouse Falls, where when we're out there shooting at Palouse Falls, and you said it was a bright, sunshiny day, that was just a super amount of contrast that we were dealing with. Describe the scene a little bit for us.
Yeah, it was just crazy bright. It was really hot. Even though it's 103 here in Texas, I was unprepared.
Yeah.
I was unprepared because even just a short drive, the everything, even the weather changed. But because we had this bright sun, shining down on this water, the water in Palouse Falls isn't just soft. It is like forcefully, it's all kind of, a lot of water comes through a narrow place, and it's a lot. And so that sun was really reflecting off of that water, a bright white. And then you've got the walls of the canyon where it opens into, which are basalt, which are dark. And so you really do have that contrast there.
Yeah.
To kind of, to kind of make sense of, when you're taking an image. But what we also got, which was a real bonus because of that sun, was a rainbow coming off the falls. So it's how do you make all of those things work together? So it was actually, that sun gave us a lot of really great contrast. So it's awesome.
It really did. And so we had the contrast of those dark basalt, and when they get wet, they even get darker. And then we had the notion of the hard rock, and you can make the water go soft with your exposure. You can either make the water go hard or soft, just depending on how you want to render that. And then, of course, that extra special piece of cotton candy of that, sweetness, is what I'm trying to say, of that rainbow. That was just amazing to see that. And so for those of you in YouTube land, you've seen a picture already. But it's just an amazing experience to isolate some of these things, to think about these things, and how to create a quote unquote good image out of it. Let's jump back to this image from Croatia. This is just off the coast from the little city of Zadar, and we have various things going on here, but it's a longer exposure, and there's just constant motion, constant chaos going on. And so because of that motion, the boat is moving, the water is moving, but when we look at that boat, that's where the contrast is, and that's where the eye goes to. When you look at the histogram, I have the histogram showing here, and it spikes, comes like a mountain right in the middle. And so when you normally look at that, you're like, Brent, that's not a high contrast image because we don't have that separation of tonality. But we do in the main interest of the subject here. We got the boat, we got the shadow underneath the boat. So we have this localized contrast, and that's where the eye is just instantly drawn to because we have that contrast going on. We can think about other items in this, as far as rule of thirds and such like that, but really this image, I think, is about contrast. And so when we're looking for what can make something interesting in an image, one of my things I'm always looking for, and Bree, help me understand your experience. You've described yourself as a newer photographer, and you are at the beginning of this photography journey. But what I'm saying here is if you can have contrast in your picture, you're probably going to have something more interesting for that individual to be looking at anyway. And I just want to, what is your perspective on that?
I like contrast. I'm finding myself as part of this journey is figuring out what I gravitate towards, what I like from an image. I'm finding I'm liking the softer lights, but I think it depends on what you're drawn to. And when we went to Palouse Falls, of course I'm going to get of course we're going to get an image of Palouse Falls, right? And I do want to say I haven't processed all of these. I'm still working on my Photoshop skills. So what I sent you is unprocessed.
No worries.
Nothing done in post. But I think I feel like it's all about what you're drawn to. And so knowing how to knowing about all of these things, contrast and some of these others, so that when you get to a place and you see something that inspires you, you know how to deal with it, and you know how to create the image in your camera. Or this is just for me, that is enjoyable.
Sure.
So that's kind of where I'm at with this whole idea of contrast. I want to know about it. I want to study it so that when I get out and I have a scene that obviously has a high dynamic range with lots of contrast or whatever, then I know how to deal with it.
Absolutely. So just knowing that's something to be hunting for.
Yeah.
And then you have the technical issues, which we're really not getting into today so much. We'll probably get into a little bit, but it's just about what to even look for in the hunt for successful images, the hunt for images that strike you, that are interesting to you, and the like. And so here in the next image, also coming from Croatia, this is also from the city of Zadar, and you probably wouldn't know it until I tell you, but this is an absolute deluge of rain. When I was there in 2017, we got hit with one of those 30-year storm type things, and it shut the country down for a day. And there's not, again, in the main areas where you're looking at, it doesn't feel like a whole lot of contrast. So when you look at the histogram, you can see everything is clumped there. But we then have this silhouetted tree, and the silhouetted tree is a framing element, and I think the biggest reason why I'm using this idea of a silhouetted tree is it provides context, but also I find it makes everything else along that little sort of boardwalk area. It's not a boardwalk specifically, but that if it were a South American city, it would be called the Malecon. I can't think of what they call it in Croatia, but anyway, that region, that you would walk right along the water, it just provides, it kind of hugs it, and it kind of provides its own context to it and supports it, and then it helps you really look at the texture in the sand and the texture on the concrete areas there, the texture in the water, all these different things going on in the image.
And I I was wondering when I first, because you sent me all of these, I've made some notes. I was wondering why you, there's obviously some detail in the tree. And so I was wondering why you made that go total black as opposed to having, showing us some detail.
Yeah, and that's a really good conversation because I put a picture in our Facebook group for the Latitude Photography Podcast in the Facebook group with a sunrise, and I had a barn there, and I said, "What do you guys like?" I had one where it was completely black and one where we had a little bit of detail coming in, and a lot of people said they wanted the one with the detail, and so here,
I picked black, by the way. I picked all
oh,
black.
you did? Okay, good.
I picked all black.
That was my initial thought, is to pick all black, but I think there is something to it, and I can see where the listeners are saying when it's something that big, it's probably nice to have a little bit of detail coming through. And so on this particular subject, I think we're kind of straddling that fence of the presence, the size of the silhouette versus the need for detail. And in the upper portion of it, we do have a little bit of detail coming through, but as you get over to the trunk and the 2/3 of the image across the top, we virtually have zero detail. The biggest reason though that I wanted to make that go black is I didn't want it to be a visual distraction for the rest of the image. And because it's not a visual distraction for the rest of the image, the eye, if you're going to be looking into that, it's not going to be something that the eye gets caught up in and starts concentrating on. And because there's no detail there, it just goes instantly back. And to me, it was about the storm, and this gives you sort of a feeling of protection, even though I was not standing under this tree. I was using a zoom lens to zoom in, but it does give you a feeling of protection, and it gives you this, the grayness out there. And then it also tells you to focus on that texture of the sand and all these other things. And those are the types of contrast in this image that are important to me. Yes, we have bright and dark contrast, but we also have that difference in the textures from the water and the sand or the dirt, whatever that is there. We have these different elements that are contrasting in what they are, and that just focuses you there, and that makes you, as a viewer, not pay attention to the tree as a subject, but as a framing element.
Yeah. And we know what a tree looks like.
Yeah, we know that.
we know it.
Most people, that's another good thing, because we do rely on our memory. Most people have touched the trunk of a tree. Not this exact type tree, of course, but we know what bark is like. We know what leaves are like. And so there's not that much mystery there that we need to have satisfied for ourselves, because we know what that's like already. Whereas if it's something else where we don't know what it's like, it might still be a mystery for us, and we need to have that visual information to fill us in on what it is.
Right.
All right, on this image, we're concentrating again on the contrast between textures. Many different textures at work in this image. This is from Plitvice Lakes National Park. And the pathway has its own texture. The leaves have their own texture. The flowing water, whether it's down below the pathway, whether it's up there in the waterfall in the background, all of these have their differing textures, and it's almost chaotic in this image and a little bit overwhelming possibly. But that's what is our job as a photographer, to not let it get out of hand, to keep it under wraps. And for me, what does that is, quite frankly, just that pathway. That pathway gives you the sanity of this image. It gives you the place where the eye is supposed to go. Very directly, this is the journey I'm supposed to take visually. And then, of course, all these other things are just eye candy to look at and get distracted by. But we still have the notion we can come back, and because of this strong element otherwise, we're not just overloaded with chaos.
Yeah, awesome. I was going to ask you what that meant, to get out of hand. Because I think when you have something this busy and you have a lot of textures, and you have to figure out how to deal with it,
That's right.
When you're in the moment. And what I wrote was, does this mean to draw your eye in, focus on the subject? Does it mean you do it in camera, or is it a combination of doing it in camera and in post-processing? Because you could do a lot of...
There is so much post-processing on this image, and you wouldn't even know it. So let me tell you the two things about this image with relation to not letting it get out of hand. So the first thing is I wanted a long exposure so that water would create a different texture. If I had a short exposure, then the texture of the water would simply compete with the texture of the leaves, and I don't want that. I want it to be its own subject, and so by having a long exposure, we get it to be its own subject, separate from the leaves. And then when we're in post production, what I have going on here is I think this is 100% done in Lightroom for the major portions. When I go take it to print and whatnot, I go to Photoshop. But as far as the major portions of what we're seeing here, it's all done in Lightroom. And so I'm using these different adjustment brushes where you can paint in these areas. In this case, the pathway, maybe the leaves or different areas of the water. You can isolate those different areas and edit those individually. And so what I've done here is an overall vignette to darken the edges of the scene, but then I've also taken that pathway and I've given it a little extra texture, a little extra clarity to really bring it out, a little extra saturation to really bring it out and have it be the main piece, as it were. Now, because of the composition, of course, it starts you right there, but I cropped it this way too. The original is, of course, a full frame vertical image, but I cropped it here as a square because that lower part of the pathway starts to actually not be in focus. It's slightly soft and out of focus. And it's not terrible. It's just for what I have here, I was like, what? I like the square. We're going to go with the square for today.
And it could be distracting, and that's your judgment call that you make when you're doing your adjustments.
Absolutely, because if this is intended to be a pathway where you're inviting someone to be on a visual walk, why would you start them on something that they can't render very well?
Right.
Now you can go back and say, well, Brent, that was a mistake you made when you were shooting this picture, and I can kind of buy that. But that's where on this particular shot, the square works, and pretty sure, this was 3 years ago-ish now, I was thinking of that square framing anyway when I was framing it up. So it's not that, I don't think I made a mistake by having that be blurry down in front. It was just, I didn't care about it because I knew that wasn't going to be my final result. Now, when I do print it and I include the whole thing, so the vertical image, then I have to worry about that. But that's where I just darken it a little bit. And that just means the eye is not going to look at it very much, not as much as it would otherwise. All right, let's look at this next idea, contrast ancient and modern. So here we have, I believe this is the city of Shibanek, but don't quote me on that. And so just throwing this one in for fun, but you can see the different contrasts here. We have the ancient city. We have this sculpture inset, in this wall. We've got the gorgeous texture of the wall, the stairs, the door, the doorway, everything there. And then we have these tables, chairs, and then what really is the kicker for me is that little sign off to the right-hand side. That really feels modern to me. Not only the design of it, because it's solid black and the typography on the sign, but just the overall presence of it being there, clean lines, very crisp edges, that kind of a thing. So there's just another way of thinking about contrast. That's all. All right, and then the idea of contrast with the movement. And here we're at, I believe this is Kirka Falls National Park. This leans us over the edge, and we're looking at contrast of textures again, but I'm using the water movement to create that difference in what we're looking at. We've got the wooden pathway, we've got the leaves, we've got the waterfall flowing through, we've got the moss. Lots of things going on in this image, but without that contrast of still objects versus moving objects, I don't think this would be as successful of an image. So tell me, Bree, when we were at Palouse Falls, we had certainly moving water. We had other things going on. What are some of the challenges that you remember facing when you were photographing the moving water?
I wrote a note on this. I said technical skill to achieve this.
Yeah.
So because when I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh, there's moving water. And how do you keep the plant still, but the water moving? Do you do double exposures? And I found myself in Palouse at the falls because there was one point, and I think I sent it to you. There were birds flying in front of the falls, which I thought was awesome. So I was trying to capture those. But in hindsight, I think I would have upped my shutter speed because the bird that I got is only slightly in focus, and if I would have upped my shutter speed a little bit more, I could have that could have been better. So definitely that's something now for me too, and this is all experience, right? Is remembering to check that shutter speed. What does that look like? I mean, I've kind of been fixated on focus, making sure all my images are in focus. I actually think I sent you one that isn't, so I'm going to send you a new one. But
all right.
when you put it up on Facebook, maybe it can be in focus. But
yes, we can do that.
Right. So, but that's what I was thinking. What's my shutter speed going to be? And I can think for, I've been places where you're, that seems similar to this image that you have, and thinking, if I let my shutter speed go longer, then the plants are moving. Do I want that? And that's a decision you make, or, do you take two and, do you take two with different shutter speeds and then blend them together, which I haven't quite figured that out, but that's possible. What do you, those are all things that I'm like, I've got to think about those. So
yes, that idea of blending the exposures, that can get really tricky because you've got all of that stuff you have to clone out.
Yes.
Because usually what happens is, of course, whenever you have flowing water like this, almost always do you have at least a subtle breeze.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be in a different position. And when you're freezing that action, it's going to have its blurry action, in the layer underneath it. And that's just a whale a lot of work to worry about. And that's something where, we can do that, but it just comes down to, where do you want to spend your time?
Yeah.
I tend to want to spend my time out shooting and, telling the story or whatever the case might be with relating to the experience of the images. And that work in Photoshop, while I'm never opposed to it as any type of moral issue or anything like that, do whatever you want to do with it. It's just, that's not the thing that most excites me. Now, there are some things that, as we're on our photography journeys, that, we can always find things like, that would be amazing to be able to accomplish. And so we want to be able to learn how to do that. And to have that skill set, mastered, or at least you're rather competent in it, then that's probably a good thing. But in this case, on this image, it was all about finding that happy balance between letting the breeze hopefully be calm, and letting those major elements, those major branches with leaves, not be blowing in the wind. You can see some of them, especially the ones that touch the water, those are definitely constantly moving. There's no way I'm going to stop those. But these major ones, it was important for me to have that contrast of the movement, and I did not want the leaves moving this time. Now, I've done this the exact opposite way, where I just let the shutter go and everything is moving. And then you don't have contrast of movement, you just have contrast of other things. But when everything is moving, that just gives you a whole different feel of the image.
Right.
And I also have this image without the boardwalk pieces in there, and I decided I liked it. Even though they're slightly softer, I liked that foundational element that it gives you, because that's another thing of being present again. Whereas if I cropped that out, then the idea of you as a viewer standing there is eliminated, and I wanted you to feel like you could stand there.
Right. And I love that there are so many, when you come to a place that inspires you, you have so many options, as to how you want it to look. Because this, if you had 10 people shooting the same thing, it would look 10 different ways. And
yes,
that's awesome.
Good. Yes. 10 different ways is definitely a good thing. All right. Contrast of size. We can also call this scale. And the idea of scale is just, it is what, something is big, something is small, something is as it relates to the other elements. That's what's, I think, really important here. And it's not really only about the physical size of something, but it's also about your personal impression of something. So you have objective scale and you have subjective scale. And if you're looking at an item and you're saying, oh my, that just seems so big, and that is definitely your idea of subjective scale. An idea of objective scale is something where you say, okay, like if you have a map and it has, like 1 inch on the map equals 5 miles in real life. Okay, that's an objective scale. It's very clear as to what the ratio is between those items. So in this one, it's a little bit more, well, it's kind of a blend, I think, between the objective and subjective. But that building in the background is so small compared to the boat in the foreground. But instinctively, we know there's a size difference there. And there's just something about making this boat, physically larger in the scene. It brings more attention to it. And that's where you start visually in it. And then you start walking around the scene visually.
Yeah.
Did you have any questions or notes on this idea of scale or size or anything like that?
Well, I was thinking about different lenses and how different
Right.
focal lengths will give you that. And so that's an experiment that you have to do and know your lenses and know what they're capable of. Know that, depending on where you're standing or whatever, because I have an 18 millimeter and I can take that, put it real close to the ground, and a little tiny puddle can look really, really big, right? And
Right.
and that could that can help give contrast too. So it's knowing, kind of what you want to do to give that contrast. And I was also thinking about my falls picture with that little bird on there. That bird is so tiny in the frame, and the
Sure.
falls are just falling all around it.
Yeah.
So in my head, I feel that, oh my gosh, that bird, it almost looks like it's going to be swallowed up by that water. So,
Yes. Yeah, your lens is huge here because this is a wider angle as well. I'm out on this tiniest of little makeshift docks, and right at sunrise. This is the little town of Trogir, just outside of Split, and by getting close, that's what counts. That's what makes it work, as far as emphasizing that foreground element and getting that scale proportion blown out. If I were to go more telephoto, I would have to have been further back, and then the physical sizes of these elements would feel more the same. Like that boat in the background feels a lot smaller, well, as does the building. And so if I were to use a telephoto lens to grab those two from this perspective, they would be in the same perspective, and their relationship of size would be a lot closer. And I just don't think it would be that as interesting of an image.
right. Yeah, agreed.
All right, so we're going to head back to Hong Kong. This is, I forget which island, I think it's Peng Chau. We have contrast of color and the whole notion about the various ideas of color. Now, I also have in this whole course of design and creativity and photography, I've got 3 modules just on experiments and understanding color and all sorts of things color related. So we're not going to dive too deep right now, but just understanding the contrast of color. The warm colors advance, the cooler colors recede. That door, that rusted out door, peeling paint door, really. The texture is somewhat similar, a little smoother, but somewhat similar to that concrete wall. But then when we're looking at that color, that's just, I was walking along the trail and I was like, that thing, this whole thing I'm looking at, that is ugly. But I need to shoot it because that red door, that orange door, whatever, I was just like so drawn to it. I just had to do something to make it work. And so, yeah, work the scene 5-10 minutes, get the right foliage in to support the image, and pull the things out that don't need to support the image, and bang, this brilliant color just comes through.
I love that you said how long you were figuring out how to make this work, because sometimes that really does, we really do have to do that.
Yeah.
And I sent you an image that's some yellow moss on some on a tree, and then the roots are exposed. So I
Ah,
really, that for me, when I walked past it, that yellow moss jumped out at me.
absolutely.
Even though that's the raw file, I really have to, I'm thinking about in my mind how I want that yellow to contrast against the dirt, against the other, other greenery in the scene. And I was there for 30 minutes. Like,
Nice. Yeah.
I have all kinds of images. So I was there for 30 minutes doing all kinds of things in all different ways,
Ah,
polarizer, no polarizer, because I just thought it was so interesting. But it's the same kind of thing, right? And
I love
so
it. Yes.
I'm in my head figuring out now how do I want to create that contrast, in my post processing, to make
Absolutely.
that pop.
Absolutely. Love it. All right. Hierarchy. This is another design principle that we want to think about when we're looking at this notion of composition, visual form making, that kind of a thing. And I've got a quote here by Victor Papanek. Design is a conscious effort to impose a meaningful order. And that just is quite possibly the best way to ever coin that phrase. I don't think I could ever put anything better onto that, because when we're creating an image that has meaning to us, I think it's important that we are able to define some kind of meaningful order, and we do it consciously. We do it with thought. We do it with purpose. And here we've got the big Buddha on Lantau Island in Hong Kong, and I've converted it to black and white. And I don't think there's any question as to the hierarchy of this image. The big Buddha is at the top of the mountain. He is photographed from across the way on another hilltop. And I'm using a long lens to zoom in, and it's a really overcast, junky day. But I was able to still get some good detail rendered on the bronze that is the Buddha. But it's about saying, here's the most important thing in this image, here's the next important thing in the image, and here's the third, fourth, however many items you have. It should be obvious when we look at an image, what is your point? Get to the point, make that clear to your viewer. Whatever's important needs to be done. There's zero confusion here on this one. And consider this quote too. When you're out, this quote of design is conscious effort to impose meaningful order. When you're out shooting, slow down and think about the meaningful order of your composition. And, oops, that C word slides in again. Composition is pretty much what it is about, right?
Right. You know what I've done is in relation to this is I've put a little mini notebook in my camera bag with a little pencil, and I keep meaning to do this, but it's sometimes when I get somewhere, I think, oh, I've got to sit down and just write out what is the thing that I see, what is the most important thing here, and second most important, like what is the thing that is drawing me to this. And I think when you write it out, and ask yourself those real pointed questions, then you'll have better focus. At least I'm finding that for myself, about what it is that's the most important in the
Yes.
image, and that will help. For me, that helps me when I get somewhere to really hone in on that particular thing, and I'm finding it's making for better images.
Absolutely. When several months ago, I interviewed Ibarionex Perello on the show, and he talked about journaling and how
Maybe
important that
that's where I heard
is.
it, Brent.
It must be. It must be. And that's something that I certainly require of my students as well. When they're working on like the whole quarter, really. Part in some classes, part of their whole assignment is just to journal their design experience, their design process for that whole quarter, and that is important because it's another way, especially if you handwrite it. That's hugely important because it is a totally different mental picture. It's a mental element going on when you handwrite something versus typing it or doing an audio recording or anything like that. It has a different effect on you in your brain, and it is just more deep-seated, and I just can't recommend it enough when you're looking to journal or otherwise track your things, your thoughts. The only other thing I might recommend, Bree, is when you're journaling that, make sure you also are recording, at least in the slightest amounts, a little bit about just what your thoughts are on how this scene, how this area, this subject, what are your thoughts on your emotions that you're experiencing? And I do not suggest anyone just dive deep into like the deepest emotional thing ever. No.
I'm all about it this year. I'm all
Does
about
it make
it.
you happy? But does it make you happy? Does it make you relaxed? Does it make you whatever that is drawing you in? Okay, you've identified what is drawing you in. Now search for the why, and if you can answer that why, excellent. If you can't, keep at it, because eventually you're going to start to understand what your why is, and then you're going to really start going down like mad, and it's going to be amazing stuff.
And I think we just did a little like rabbit hole. But my last
We
thing,
did.
my last thing about that is, I think when you do that, and that's a great suggestion, because then I can go back in my post processing and go, oh, that's the emotion I was feeling. How do I want to make that come across so that people can see, back to hierarchy, what the most important thing is in my image, and how and maybe hopefully they understand how I was feeling and why,
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. And then this next image, hierarchy, it's difficult without it. An image that is difficult to interpret without it. If your image lacks effective hierarchy, the viewer just might get confused, and that's not a good thing. And so this image is a rainy window on the ferry in Hong Kong, and it's just the water just running down in sheets, and everything behind it is blurry, kind of a thing. We see a little outline, an orange outline of a life preserver. We see the railing and such like that, but everything is just blurred, and everything there's just. I think this might be an interesting image because of the mystery, but there's almost no hierarchy here, and that's where we don't want to confuse our people that are looking at our images. And if you feel confused when you look at an image, your viewers are definitely going to feel confused, and we don't want that. Sometimes we do. It just depends. If you're looking for chaos, then maybe something like this is more to float your boat, as it were. All right, on this one, too, there's a very specific reason why I chose this one. And you mentioned, too, how you liked how I mentioned how long it took to set up a shot. This one probably took me at least a half an hour to make.
what?
I know. Isn't that crazy?
It feels like you're just walking by, saw a bike, clicked a pic.
Yep. So we're on, trying to remember the island we're on. That's not important. We, probably Llama Island. But anyway, walking by, got out of the common tourist whatever area, just walking through this area, and I saw this corrugated steel as this wall type thing, and I was like, that's very interesting. I love that texture. And here's this bicycle, and I just like, this is really cool. And it was almost exactly in this position. It's not like I walked across the courtyard and brought this bicycle over here or anything like that. I did tool around a little bit with the scene, but I did not do that kind of major work. But I kept working this image over and over, and I got a shot, I got another shot, I isolated this, and I eliminated that. People are walking by looking at me like crazy, and I've also got a buddy with me doing some video on this, so I actually have this specific one as a specific lesson as well. It was all about finding what makes this image work, though. I knew I liked the bicycle. I knew I liked that corrugated steel. But then I'm like, what do I do with it? And it was about the exploration of figuring out what to do with it. Well, this image to me is about basically coming home. And you're invited as a viewer to just walk on up those steps. But it's really important that we declutter a scene, visually speaking. What you don't see here is all this stuff that I removed. There's about 2 or 3 items that I actually eliminated just by being able to position the camera right, so I didn't have to manipulate the scene. I manipulated my interpretation of the scene. But then there was something just behind the bicycle that was very annoying, so I did get in and I removed that from the scene, and I just set it off to the side, out of frame. And then I went back and took a picture, and this was it. And I was like, yes. And I even like, way off on the right-hand side, we've got those pipes, those 4 pipes. And on the top of the fourth pipe, there's this purple lid on this clear bottle. I even like that. It's just, it gives you a sense of presence, a sense of authenticity. Even that newspaper just kind of laying there on the floor just before you go up the first step, even that I like, because again, it's about that notion. If those elements were elsewhere, though, I totally would have gotten rid of them, and I wouldn't have made this image with those elements elsewhere. They needed to be in that location. They were naturally there, hallelujah, but it's just about declutter the scene where the things are important and then allow this, in this case, the viewer to go around. And it's about hierarchy again. Where do you start? Where do you end?
I appreciate it. I actually appreciate knowing, I appreciate the image even more, knowing all those things, because now I can see how you were in just the right place to show the stairs, but not too much. Things are lined up. I love that.
In the lesson that I have that I'll be putting out, I believe I still have the progression of the images, how the image built in. And so I'll be able to showcase the stepping of, here's what it was initially, and then here's the next stage, the next stage. And it's about 3 or 4 stages that I have. And it's really satisfying when something comes out as successfully as it can.
So my last comment, Brent, is I guess it really does pay off to take your time and think about all of these things
Oh yes,
when you're in a place.
I'm a huge proponent of slowing. When you're visiting a foreign land like this, it might be tempting to just say, I got to go here, and you just run around like a chicken with your head cut off, and you'll probably get some good images. I'm not going to doubt that. But it just depends on what your purpose for those images are. If your purpose is to take something and create something that's important to you, then you got to slow down. To me, there's no other way to do it. You just got to slow down.
Awesome.
And then sometimes we get patterns, which are going to basically end up being a lack of hierarchy. And, this is clearly a pattern shot. There's minimal hierarchy at first, but I might suggest that if you look at that third row from the bottom, that might be the one that you're mostly hovering on. That might be the one that you mostly gravitate towards. And that is because the color is the strongest. The color is the most saturated there. It's slightly more saturated than the pieces around it, below it, and above it. And then, of course, those 3 rows, 2.5 rows on the top, those are very unsaturated comparatively. And so here we do have some hierarchy going on, but it's not as strong as what we've seen in these other images. So anyway, this comes from the underground, the subway in the city of Prague.
So study up on color so you can.
When you see it, yes. And quite frankly, when I shot this, I was all about the pattern. And it was about trying to capture that pattern. And as I'm going through in post-production, I'm looking for images that speak to hierarchy. I was literally looking for an image that lacked hierarchy, and so I came to this one. But then I start analyzing it some more, and I was like, well, it has a little bit. There's just a little bit there. So, that's how this one came to be in this image. All right, so in hierarchy, what have we learned? Certainly color plays a role. The value, the brightness, the darkness plays a role. The size or the scale of something plays a role. The placement in the frame plays a role. The texture of the elements play a role. And then I have position here, which is probably very close to placement. As boring and nondescript of a photo as this particular image is, it still has hierarchy. It's probably fairly weak. In Western cultures, we start from the left and we read to the right. So that progression of trash bins, the first trash bin is on the left. And I also, on the right, I crop off the trash bin. So that means that one is less important. So if you come from a non-Western culture, you might not like this image anywhere near as much as you might if you're coming from a Western culture, just because of that kind of built-in understanding of how we read things and how we interpret things. So we have a progression here, and it's assumed this is a collection of rubbish bins, and those that are slightly closer to the curb, some are closer than the others. One of them has its little toe kind of hanging over the edge. So maybe there's an advancement there where you might feel that one has a certain level of hierarchy. It's so subtle, though. I think we're trying to dig too much out of this image if we get into that.
I
So we
saw the
look for these.
numbers.
Oh, go ahead.
I saw the numbers first, Brent.
Yeah, the 296.
Yeah, and that's the one that stands out to me, and it's a little forward, so my eye gravitates towards that middle one
Perfect.
automatically.
I love it.
I don't know
I
why.
love it. No, I think that's great because there is something that, number one, it's the 296 is white, so it's bright, it's got detail, and it's something you can read. That one to the left of it, there's nothing on it. It's just gray, and it has a single vertical line going up the middle, so it's boring. So this one has texture, it's got dense, it's got the 296, it's very legible, and it's the only thing that has something that's really legible on it. So that makes a lot of sense that you would just gravitate right towards that one. Good. Good to know. All right, and this one with lines, and this is possibly a confusing mishmash of lines. They do create a sense of volume of this space, so that really helps. So, we have this tower. It comes to us from the small little town of Stromberg in the Czech Republic. And so I climbed up there, and I was just like, this is really cool. I love this little tower. But it's all about these lines and how they're intersecting and crisscrossing and all sorts of things. A little bit chaotic, probably, in this image. There's just so much going on, but it's really about, again, the idea of those lines are going to draw you from one location to another. So for instance, Bree, take a look. Here's what I should do. I should just have you tell me, what did your eye look at first in this image?
My eye saw let's see. I saw kind of the metal lines at the top. And then my eye went immediately down to the brightness in the kind of the bottom of the stairs. And it took me really quickly all the way down in there.
Yep. Yeah, and those lines support that motion, just spiraling down. And you started it up toward the top where you said, and everything supports you. Most everything supports you starting at the top. Whether you're way down at the lower right-hand corner, you've got that line going literally down to the base of the railing that meets up with the floor, and then the other crossbar coming up to the top of the railing, and then that railing shoots you back down. You don't look at that, but that's a subconscious element that tells you shouldn't look here, look up there, and then just you spiral on down.
What focal length is that, Brent? Do you remember?
That's going to be a really wide angle. This should be about 16 millimeters, and then it's a 2-frame panorama.
Okay. Just curious.
Yeah. All right, and then sometimes our lines, in this case, they start out as a series of dots, and sometimes our lines are more, in our memory, they're more metaphorical. And I just loved this shot as I was walking through in Berlin of these bicycle racks where the bicycle tire itself is on the line where the Berlin Wall once stood. And if you've studied, especially any type of World War II history and post-World War II of the wall going up and things along those lines, and then in 89 when it came down, or 90, it started coming down in 89, but starting to continue coming down. There's just a massive part of history that goes on here, and here's what it is today. And we're just resting our bicycle tire on it. So to me, there's way more involved. It's a series of dots or lines, dots in this case with the different brick pieces, but it creates this line that goes on as far as the eye can see, because you're in the city and you could follow it and you can go, take it to the pieces of the wall that are still there, but most of the wall is down for sure.
Most of it.
Most of it, yes.
There's some really good parts that are still up.
Oh, it's amazing.
It is.
And I just, there was a museum portion of it where the wall is crumbling, and so you can look through the wall, and there's just so many very interesting things there in Berlin. If anyone hasn't been to Berlin, I definitely recommend you go. This comes from, I believe, it might be the Sony Center, but anyway, these straight lines, they create a lot of energy. And so I'm looking at this idea of this roofing element. All of those straight lines are just concentrating everything on the center, and it's just, you can't help but be drawn towards the center, and there's just so much energy created by those lines. So that's what lines do for us. They create energy in our image, and what type of energy they create is just dependent on what kind of lines they are and how many there are of them. So there's lots of lines, and If you have a single line, that's going to be a lot different because you have the one element that is going to lead you through. And if it's waving back and forth, it'll be more relaxed energy. Whereas this one, bang, it's really sharp edges and it's just very, very strong.
Can I tell you my observations about this one?
Please.
I'm probably going to anyway. But I saw all those lines radiating out, like pushing
Okay.
out very strong.
Yes.
And then the curve around it was like the
Yes.
barrier that held it in. So it felt like it was stopped by those lines coming out were stopped by those curves, which was it. So you got kind of two conflicting,
Yep.
Anyway, it's just
And
interesting.
that's perfect. That's what's amazing about photography is for me it might work in one sense, and for you the exact same image might have some successes, but for completely different reasons. Now, question for you: did you start at the central point where those cables are coming together, and you're shooting out, radiating out from those cables that are right in the middle, or did you start in the upper portion where it's kind of spreading out as a cone, and then it comes down to where those cables are?
I don't know if I remember, but
Okay.
it might have
Is
been I saw the tower part.
okay.
And then maybe you have more context because you took the image and you were there. Because I haven't been to this place, but yeah, I saw the tower and then it kind of pointed
Yep.
all up into
Good.
that outer those.
Yeah, and that's good to know. Like you mentioned, you haven't been here, so the context is definitely different, and that's just something as photographers we need to understand. There's limitations to what we're able to show and what we're able to communicate, and this is a perfect example of it. I love it.
Right.
All right, so here we have straight lines working together. They suggest strength, and while we had energy in those other ones, these are all working together. These lines, they're holding up. Now, obviously, it's a building as well. We have the German Bundestag, Reichstag, excuse me. Reichstag is the building. Strength, rather strong implied shapes as well. So we got some good rectangular type shapes. They speak more to the whole strength and volume of the space of the building. And then those evenness of the lines, I think they might suggest longevity. If they're moving in one way or another, the lines would suggest a change over time. But everything is very stable, and so it might suggest longevity as well.
And we see this kind of thing in nature with like big, tall, strong trees and things like that.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And something actually that I'm seeing for the very first time in the shadow areas underneath where that word Volca is. There's some kind of relief sculpture up in the center of that ceiling, and it has a W on it. And I actually hadn't seen that before. This is interesting. All right, other lines, chaotic lines in this case. The pathway from up on the hill out towards the overview. This is overlooking the city of Quito. And Vasily Kandinsky says, a line is the track made by the moving point. And so that is, you've got your point and you're moving it through space, you're moving it along a plane. That is definitely a good way to characterize what is a line. And this one is rather organic, made by lots of moving points, such as people, over and over again. Another one from Quito, Ecuador. A plane is formed by these lines when they all come together. You need 3 points at a minimum to make a plane, and so these planes and shapes, they're very repeatable. They're very, the same over and over, so it creates a pattern. And then, of course, we have the stained glass coming through with this. Everything is very, how do I say, repetitious, I guess, but all those lines, they're leading you up towards the front of the church, aren't they? They're taking you on a journey past all these different pieces of stained glass, past all of these arches. If you're on the floor, you have the pews of the church. So these shapes, these planes with edges, and that's this photo of the National Cathedral in Quito. Many different areas that form smaller and larger planes. So we've got a lot of contrast in just what this is made up as well.
And I sent you an image of when I was at Steptoe Butte in the Palouse, and there's the farmland kind of creates its own. I think it's a vertical. The farmland creates like these natural lines, and so I've got one with the property boundaries or the I don't know, the farm boundaries kind of coming out from the left-hand side, but it leads you kind of diagonally, not all the way to the other side, but kind of up into like the top third of the image, and then the Palouse just kind of rolls back behind there.
Nice.
And I just loved how the lines kind of delineated some of these different crops, like what is it? The canola there. What is it? Must be wheat there. And just kind of pushes you, back in there so you can see the whole thing. I don't know. I loved it.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll take a look at those
Yeah.
in just a few more moments.
Sure.
Very good. All right, this next one is lines can separate or divide. And here we have Latitude 0. I loved this because when I relaunched the podcast, I relaunched with this image because I was like, there's no better place than 0 when you're starting out. Ecuador, they have this little place, and they have this line here. And so I got a picture of the equator, basically, is what we can.
That's awesome.
Whether it's obvious or, right there, like it's painted in red or it's implied, lines can divide. They can surround things. They can divide things. And if its function is not clear to you, my suggestion is find a way to make it clear so your viewers know what your point is and what's going on with your purpose for that photograph. All right, on this next image, we go back to Hong Kong. And in these, I think the lines are providing perspective because we've got the lights in the signage up above, but then we have these streaking lights that is the passing bus. So it's a really long exposure. And then we just got this bus going through, and that's what draws it all together for the viewer. I think this would be a chaotic image if we didn't have those streaking lights. And because we have the traffic lights and the bus lights, we have a bit of cohesion coming together, which is kind of nice. They provide a perspective, and they help us understand the shape of the objects and the depth of the scene. Lines and their importance are often overlooked because they are fundamental. I know for myself, I might look at a scene and not even think one bit about the lines until I get into post-production, and that's a mistake. We should think they are fundamental, and they are a fundamental building block, and if you can use those as such, then you can probably create stronger images because of it. And the next image is Palouse oriented. So you were talking a little bit ago about the Palouse, and in this case, I think the lines set the mood. And here we've got the dust line from this semi truck that's pulling boxes, big load of something. I don't know what it is exactly, but it's a nice S curve, and that dust trail feels a bit lazy. It's relaxed. Probably not as much as if it were a Z shape or more of a true S shape. But the rolling hills, they help keep you in that sense of calm as well. So there's nothing that's hugely like on edge and super exciting here. Things are a little more relaxed and a little more surreal in this image. And then, of course, we've cropped out the horizon, so it just feels like it just goes on to infinity, which when you're in the Palouse, it kind of does feel like it's going on to infinity.
I love it. It was awesome. And you were lucky to get this truck kind of making that dust.
That was, boy, howdy, that was providential for sure. We're just hanging up there, and I'm just like, oh, wow. I saw it just barely coming in. I was like, please go down this road. And it did, and it was awesome. So
Gotta be ready.
Gotta be ready. All right, so I'm going to start off with this image. How many major lines can you count in this image? Certainly the waterfall, and you might argue that there's more than one line there too. And then the second, for me anyway, is that fence as it winds down towards the hiker, which happens to be myself, by the way. And then, of course, we have the overhanging cliff. Creates a very strong element, a very strong line. And then we can also use this image to transition our conversation to visual weight as well. We were going to talk about visual weight. We mentioned we would do that. But we have that cliff weighing in, hanging over the hiker, weighing in, and it's being supported by that line of the waterfall. So that's kind of nice too. But what other lines, Bree, do you find in this image? Maybe there's subtle lines, more obvious lines, but what other lines do you find in this image?
Well, I counted 6. I have an iPad with a pencil, and so I drew on it.
Perfect. Love it. Love it.
So I have that. I have all those same ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you also have in the middle, so you've got all of those that you talked about, plus the waterfall coming down, because those are definite
Yeah.
lines. But then you also have the kind of the rock faces in the back are making some lines, which all kind of,
Uh-huh.
to me, they're pointing into the waterfall. Like, look
Sure.
here. And they're on a diagonal. They're not straight. It's not a flat plane. So they're kind of in the diagonal, which, and so you've got a lot of triangles too, actually, going on, which I like. I like the triangles. So yeah, they're all, but for me, they're everything kind of points up and back to that waterfall, and and that's you looking at the waterfall. So,
It
and
is.
it
Yes.
all kind of points and keeps your eye focused in there.
Absolutely. And I'd also like to point out, if I didn't have a red stripe on my shirt, I would just totally blend in. But the fact that I have a red stripe, that's another line, but that really helps the figures, pop a little
You
bit
just
more.
need an orange hat, Brent.
Oh man, that would be crazy. It's tempting though. It's tempting.
Right?
So visual weight and scale, this idea about the strength of an image, of a subject I should say, and the scale that it has. We've talked a little bit already about subjective scale and objective scale, and subjective referring to how scale is measured or understood, the impression that someone has of the object. A photo will lack interest if it's boring and dull, of course, but maybe scale is one of the reasons why it's dull. Maybe we haven't emphasized something enough. I think that's the takeaway that we might want to be thinking about here. What can we do to inflict more of that active interest from our viewers? And scale just might be something that does that for us. And in this particular image, I'm asking the question on the slide here, do you know how large this foreground balloon is? Not really. We don't know the exact size of it, but we kind of have a sense in our minds. It's big. And that other balloon back there, it's also big. And because hot air balloons just aren't tiny. Yeah, we have different sizes of hot air balloons, but they're just not tiny.
And we're relying a lot on our memories too, and what we know of the world.
Absolutely. Those almost always are we relying on that. And it's
Yeah.
very interesting to me when I come across someone who doesn't have these experiences, in particular my children, when I'll say something or show them something and they have no context, they have no understanding, then we get to provide them context and understanding so they can then understand what's going on here for sure. Perspective can be distorted when you're zooming in for sure, like we have here on this macro shot. And certainly most of us adults, we have seen a poppy, but we might not have seen it in this type of presentation. We might not have seen it, surrounded by this greenery, surrounded by something like this. So there's still something of interest, I think, that we can bring to it, and it elevates the scale when we show it this largely. But what about the weight of this, the visual weight? We can think of weight as being, the difference between bright and dark, whereas dark things tend to be heavy, bright things tend to be light and airy. But in this case, I would say the flower completely has all the visual weight because it's bright, because it's in focus, because that's the thing that I'm telling you. By focusing on it, I'm telling the viewer that's what's important. And so I'm giving visual weight to that by forcing the viewer's eye to be looking at it. So we've skipped a few here due to time. We really don't want to have this take, much more than an hour. So we're going to skip here to basic balance. And this macro shot, again, this was taken at Azalea Park in Brookings, Oregon. And things just feel right when they're balanced. And so there's two types of balance, symmetrical and asymmetrical. And here we've got pretty much asymmetrical. The things are not equal on both sides. And we've got this spider. He's, created some kind of web we can see just above him connecting to other elements, and he's about to drop. He's about to just go off the edge of this petal and drop on down. So these areas, they balance each other out a bit. This where the spider is, where the rest of the flower is. There's balance of the detail of the negative space, whether that negative space is this green areas or these white areas. And so we just have different levels of balance. Now, what's interesting to me here too is on the flower, we have some green elements that are in focus, out there on the edge, the green elements are not in focus. And of course, the white elements are in focus out there. And over here on the flower, where the green elements are in focus, the white elements are not in focus. So we have this conversation going back between green and white elements. And of course, the important parts of the spider are in focus too. All right, balance and rhythm too. Rhythm is another good principle to be thinking about, and I chose this image mostly for the idea of rhythm because of the rhythm that happens with those tree trunks. I tend to find that quite interesting. This is the lower Lewis River Falls in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest here in Washington State, and we've got those falls just going blurry in the background because of the shutter speed. But then we have these balance going with these trees. You know, we have a couple of clusters here, a couple of clusters there. And just by spacing it, hopefully just right, we have a balance between the foreground and background elements. But then we have a balance across the scene, too, with those trunks and how they're creating their own rhythm. Is there any chance you had a question or thoughts on this one, Bree?
No, I love that. I think it's this image is a really good mix of those things. And I think when I'm out and I'm shooting, I'm trying to find and figure out how to find that balance. So this is good for me to see, so that when I'm looking at all of my, images afterwards, and I can kind of look at, you have to look at all your images objectively and figure out which ones you like the best, and probably the ones that we like are the ones that have this kind of balance.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's good. And on this one from Krakow, Poland, a little more asymmetrical as well, but we have this sense of action that's happening because of the lines, because of the action of the bird. But, think about if that bird were gone. This image would be absolutely horrendously terrible. Nothing would be in focus. Nothing would be of interest. It's because that bird is there and positioned in that particular location, and then balanced with those background elements, with the fence underneath them. All these things are starting to then come and work together, and definitely helps it make sense.
Lucky shot getting that bird.
I had plenty of opportunities.
There were a lot.
There's plenty of pigeons and running down the fence line. That's all it takes. We're back in Berlin here, where I told you there's this type of museum type element where the wall is, decaying and you have holes in the wall. This is one of the more significant holes where this is very symmetrically balanced. I wanted to get one of some type of symmetry here, and where it's evenly cut. The scene is basically evenly cut, and we have the modern, well dressed up brick work in the background, and then we have this Berlin Wall element that has some deterioration going on, and so we just have this right there in the middle where it's the split. So it's kind of like a dual personality coming through on this one. All right, this idea that we're going to end with before we get to your images is Border Patrol, and I just thought this was amazing. I'm in the Czech Republic, and I got this guard, and I was like, why not? Let's toss it in here for a little bit of fun.
I love it.
With some Border Patrol. And he was perfect. He just stood there. I got close, and he couldn't talk. It's kind of like when you're at
Buckingham Palace.
When you're at Buckingham Palace type thing. And also when you're at Arlington National Cemetery here in the U.S., those guys are just so bang on. And so, but he had a colleague that I could talk to, and I was all like, is it okay to take a picture? He's like, yeah, go ahead. So what I mean by Border Patrol is just watch over those borders, watch over what's going on at the edges. We don't want things to creep in and to ruin our image just because we were careless. And so whenever you're taking a picture, do a quick sweep around, make sure things are looking good at the borders, and you're good to go. So here we're in the city of Cologne. Nothing is left to waste in this image. I emphasize the need for clean edges here because even with cropping, we have a lot going on, but if we had extra stuff going on those edges that would detract us from what's important here, then I think we would have less successful of an image. And here we've got the light rail going by. It's about to go over the river. We've got the strong element of holding, that bridge element there in the left third. We've got some type, I think it's a trash can right there nearly center. But that really heavy textured element off to the lower left area, that is a fence, sort of, that has a bunch of padlocks on it. This is one of those locations where people have just gone and expressed their love by putting padlocks all over the fence, and there's just thousands of them there. And so that's what I wanted to capture, is that texture difference, and if I had something else competing with that, it just wouldn't work anywhere nearly as well. All right, as we bring to a close, and I guess I have these two options here.
I noticed that. I noticed that in the first image when I was going through. I thought, why did Brent leave that little tiny piece of gate
and that's
or whatever?
my whole point. And here I am talking about it and realizing myself out here, in the recording on video, that's it. That piece up at top, the upper left-hand corner, that's just annoying. So let's just do a slight crop, a slight, perspective control in Lightroom and get that out of there, and it's even better image.
But I was also thinking about the line of the little gate with all the locks is just a little tiny piece on the side. So when you cropped it in, it took that out, and so it didn't.
Right
there. Makes me feel better on the next one.
Yep, it definitely feels better. Definitely. And then, this image is a little bit, we need the crop too, where I crop off those elements of the other tree on the far right side. And so those just kind of creeped in. I like the overall balance and sense of the image. And I could go into Photoshop and remove those items, clone them out. But I think it's probably a little better if I just crop it out. And then we have this element, this tree trunk in the thirds section anyway, so it works out. All right. You had something to say?
Yeah, I was going to say this one. No, the next one that you have. Yeah, talk about it or say what you're going to say and then I have a comment.
Okay. Charles Bridge in Prague, and we have the Prague Castle up behind. We've got I think it's the Vltava River coming through underneath us. And we have this bicycle here in the foreground area. And I suggest if you're going to chop something off, chop it. If you're going to have something on the edge, like this bike in the corner, don't just have the wheels of the bike kiss the edge. Here we're just chopping it completely. We still know it's a bicycle, but we're not trying to include the whole bike. And so if we had the very edge of the wheel cut off, it would just feel odd. There's a visual tension that happens when you're doing that the viewer tends to just concentrate on, and they look at, and they can't look anywhere else then. We don't want to create that for our viewers. So here we're just chopping it and making it happen. Certainly the mind knows what is there and what's going on, and it doesn't need that whole bicycle, the whole subject to fill in those blanks. Most of us know what bicycles are, and we can fill in those blanks. So what were you going to
I was going to say, and the bicycle is part of the story of this picture. It's yes. all part of it, whether you were on the bike or someone left it there to walk around or whatever. It's that you can't crop that out because that is part of the story. Like we want people to know it's a bicycle.
Right. We can't totally crop it out because then it would be a completely boring image. I've used a shallower depth of field. That big barge in the river is blurry. The lamp post on the edge of the bridge is a little bit blurry. Everything else in the background is blurry. The only thing that's in sharp focus is that bike. So certainly the bike is the subject, but I chose to crop it in camera, as it were, so that it would only show some of it and not trying to find a way to show all of it, because that just isn't necessary.
Right.
Sometimes I'm going to leave you with a little bit of the idea that it's okay to embrace the chaos. This image comes from India, driving from Delhi to Agra and literally doing drive-by shooting where I'm just hanging the camera out the window and firing as we go along. And I saw this coming up down the road a little bit. I had maybe 2 seconds to prepare, and I just go, just as we're going by, got about 3, maybe 4 shots, and this is the one that worked. Turning it to black and white made it even pop even better, and definitely worked this one over. This was captured with the original Canon 5D at 12.8 megapixels, I think it was, and bringing out that guy in the shadow right in the middle of the image. He's looking at us, or towards us anyway. That was a challenge to get it balanced just right, to bring that through. But sometimes the chaos, we've talked about ordering and planning and all sorts of things going on. Sometimes you just need to let it all go and it works out for you anyway. That's the end result there.
Well, you subdued the chaos by making it black and white.
Yeah, that's true. A little bit true
Yeah.
there. All right, let's quickly look at some of your images, and then we need to
Yeah,
wrap it
of
up
course
here.
we do. Yes. Well, this one is the waterfall coming out of Palouse Falls, and I took 2 images. The second one is not in focus, Brent. That's not. I don't think that one's in focus. I have a different one. I
Sure.
grabbed them real quick, but I'll send you a better one. And so I liked the line of the rock. I know we know where the falls are going, and I kind of feel like that rock in the foreground is almost like framing the falls a little bit.
Yeah.
So, and I liked the mystery of the rainbow of the water coming up out of it.
Absolutely.
So so I think there's a lot of like contrast here, some lines. We've got multiple things going on in this one. So
Yeah, and once you learn how to do exposure blends, it'll be amazing to take that other image that you have and bring in some of that detail into this foreground if you want to do that, because that's why you have these 2 shots, is so you can do an exposure blend.
right.
And yeah, that'll be pretty cool.
So we'll see. We'll see.
That'll be good to see.
Yeah.
All right, so here's this one. It's the forest and whatnot. Tell me about
Yeah,
this
I
image.
struggled because I don't feel like this one has a particular, a hierarchy, if you call it, but I really liked all of the rays coming down out of the clouds. We had hiked to the
Yeah.
top of Mount Spokane. It was like an 8 to 9 mile round trip hike, but I loved how the mountains kind of went down into the valley, but the trees going up the mountain, just kind of all. I feel like there's a lot of lines going on in here, but I loved the rays of the clouds and shining on the backs of those like mountains, hills in the background. And for me, it was just like a calming image. It was like, here I am in this moment. What a great day. So that's what this one was. And this one is
Awesome,
is processed. I figured out how to dodge and burn
cool.
and did that. So this one is from Steptoe Butte. There's Steptoe Butte is so great, but like your image, because in the Palouse, you just have these lines that move you through images, and I feel like because of that tree on the bottom right, you understand the immensity of this farmland, because we know how big a tree is, right? So it just kind of moves you through. I like the soft light. What can I say?
Absolutely. Now I think you posted this one in the Facebook group.
Yes, I did.
And there was some recommendations to crop out that horizon line.
I cropped it, and then I kind of brightened up the sun, and this is all these colors. I did not change them. That was the color of the sun, which is awesome. Like I almost feel like someone could say, well, that wasn't the colors, but yes, it was. That's what it looked like to me.
This is what you were getting.
Yeah.
This is what you were getting. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh, and here's the bird.
Here's the bird.
Nice.
Yes.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah,
That's so
he's
cool.
just. It's that context where you have this. What did you call it in the? Where you just have, you have a small object or a big object versus a small object, so we know how big these falls are because you've got this bird right in there. So that was so fun.
Yeah.
It was so fun.
That principle of scale.
Yes. So you can see.
Now, question for you. Did you have multiple shots where this bird was flying throughout the scene?
No, remember I was trying to push my shutter, and if I had a faster shutter speed, I think I could have caught more birds. That was this is the I have others that are really more blurry, but this is the one. I mean, he's got just enough blur so he's flying, and I kind of like where he's at in the image. So.
Yeah, because if you had either him or 2 or 3 other birds in multiple frames, you could then do bring all those together and make it feel like you have a whole flock of birds.
I could.
But we'll digress and continue
next
on
time.
to your
Next time.
Yeah.
So I actually worked this area because you can come back. I went to one place and came back, and I just really like the way this this farmland, the property line just cuts through.
Yeah, that's cool.
You know, and kind of leads your eye back into the farmland, and that bright yellow canola. I don't know. I just thought it was a good example of those lines. This is on process. So
It's that canola is just
I
amazing.
know it is.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
Good. Yeah, good use of lines for sure. Love it.
And then this is kind of, I feel like it's chaotic. You talked about chaos. I'm really going to, there's two images of this. This one is the portrait, and then the next one is the landscape version. And I might work both. But there's a lot of chaos going on, but I just love the yellow moss on this tree. So I think it's going to take some finessing to figure out how to bring these out. And I might even go back through all my images and figure out which one I like the best. But I love how much this yellow stands out, and how it's kind of framed. You've got this framing by the dirt. It's got two, you know, it kind of... it reflects each other, and it's, I don't know. I was just like, whoa, there's this yellow moss.
That's awesome.
You know, my husband was me. I'm sure he was like, oh, what is this? So
to me, this horizontal image is much stronger because those roots and those branches are going horizontally. And like you mentioned, they're kind of mirrored. You've got the lower and the upper pieces, and you've got, I think, a stronger starting point here. And it'll be interesting to see what happens when you process this image, because I think you can bring out those things that are important to you very easily here and tone down those other elements that need to be toned down, and it's just gonna explode on you.
I think so. That was my hope, that the yellow was strong enough to be able to do that. So
all right.
But I welcome, if you post these on Facebook, I welcome all of the comments.
Yes, we'll definitely get these in the Facebook group, and those that are not a part of the Facebook group, look us up. We're at Latitude Photography Podcast in the Facebook. You have to answer a question. That is, who's the host? That's myself. You can also put in Bree's name if you'd rather.
That's right.
And then I have a quick question there too. How long have you been shooting? It's just basic curiosity. Nothing big there going on there. All right, Bree, thanks so much for being here with me.
Thank you.
And really appreciate you going through these items and talking over these topics with me. And it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's been really great to go on this journey and really like work on improving myself in a big way this year. So I really appreciate awesome. This.
Excellent. All right. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Brent.
Bye-bye.